I always thought the worst thing about working the graveyard shift at a self-storage facility would be the boredom. The kind of boredom where you start counting the buzz of the fluorescent lights or reading the same emergency procedures poster over and over. That's what I expected last Thursday night, anyway, when my boss offered me double pay to cover a shift for the regular night guy, who was apparently under the weather. I needed the cash, and besides, how bad could 10 hours alone in a windowless office really be? Apparently, I had no idea. The place sits on the edge of the industrial part of town, surrounded by empty lots and highways. At night, it's cut off from everything, except the endless clatter of trucks in the distance and the wind whistling between the corrugated metal units. The air inside always smells faintly of cardboard, concrete, and something else, like dust that's never settled, or maybe mold hiding somewhere you can't quite find. The office is small, just a battered desk, a battered chair, a bank of grainy security monitors, and a coffee maker with a cracked carafe. The only light comes from a flickering overhead tube that buzzes just a little out of sync with my own breathing. My shift started at 10 p.m. The whole facility was supposed to be closed, but a couple of tenants lingered, hauling boxes into their units, heads down and eyes fixed on their business. By 10:20, the place was dead, silent. I locked the front gate as required and settled in behind the desk, checking the feeds. 12 cameras, showing rows and rows of darkened storage doors, all identical, except for the numbers stenciled on them. Every so often, a camera would glitch, the image fuzzing out for a split second, then snapping back to the same still emptiness. For a while, I distracted myself with my phone, scrolling through news and checking messages. Around midnight, I went to make coffee. As I filled the pot, I could hear the storage units creaking in the wind, the way old metal does when the temperature drops. Sometimes it almost sounded like footsteps, or like someone dragging a heavy box across concrete. I told myself it was the wind, and went back to my desk. It was just after 1 a.m. when I noticed the first strange thing. On camera 6, covering the back row, the units closest to the tree line, I saw a storage door hanging open. Not wide, just a few inches, as if someone had forgotten to lock up. The weird part was, I was positive I'd done the walkthrough before locking the gate. Every unit had been shut and latched. I couldn't shake the feeling that the open door was angled, somehow, ever so slightly toward the camera, rather than away from it. Watching. I tried to reason it out. Maybe one of the tenants hadn't closed it properly, or a gust of wind had caught the latch. But the doors are heavy, and the wind hadn't seemed that strong. Still, I grabbed the big ring of keys, zipped up my jacket and stepped outside. The air hit me cold and sharp. Outside, the only sounds were the faint hum of the highway and the distant rattling of a loose sign. The rows of units stretched ahead, perfectly still, the beam of my flashlight stabbing through the darkness. The shadows between the rows seemed deeper than they had any right to be. I walked slowly, keys clenched tight in my hand. My footsteps echoed weirdly off the metal, like someone else was following just out of sight. Unit 117, the one with the open door, was at the very end of the row. As I got closer, I saw the door was open just enough for a person to squeeze through. My mouth felt dry, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. There was probably nothing inside but boxes. And junk, maybe a draft had worked it loose. I forced myself to clear my throat and called out, just in case, my voice sounding thin in the empty night. Hello? Anyone here? The facility's closed. No response. I waited, listening to the night breathe and settle around me. My own pulse thudded in my ears as I approached the door. The metal was cold when I pushed it open, and it let out a low, groaning squeal that seemed too loud. I swept my flashlight around inside. Dented filing cabinets, an old mattress folded against the wall, a few plastic totes stacked haphazardly. The beam caught a dust-moted swirl, but nothing moved. No one crouched inside. Still, standing in the doorway, I felt a weird resistance. Like the air in there was thicker, hard to breathe. I told myself it was just musty from being closed up so long. I checked the latch. No sign of damage. I closed the door, slid the lock into place, and gave it a hard tug to be certain. The feeling didn't quite leave as I walked away, but at least the row was in order again. Back in the office, I tried to settle down, but I couldn't shake the feeling I'd overlooked something. I kept glancing at camera 6, half expecting that door to edge open again. After a while, I forced myself to focus on my phone, scrolling mindlessly. The air inside the office felt stuffy, and I cracked the door to let in some of the night chill. That's when I heard it, clear as anything. A single, deliberate knock from somewhere out in the units. Not the wind, not the creaking metal. Knock. Pause. Knock knock. It echoed, sharp and almost hollow. I froze, my skin prickling. I waited for another sound, telling myself it was something mundane. Maybe a branch blown against a wall, or a bird. But there was nothing after, just a silence that felt heavier. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe isolation was getting to me. Still, I couldn't help checking the monitors again. All 12 feeds, nothing moving, only the empty rows bathed in silvery moonlight from the distant lot lamps. But as I stared, I noticed something unsettling. On camera 3, the north row by the fence, there was a thin black line on the concrete, running from one unit to another. It hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. It almost looked like a shadow, only there was nothing nearby to cast it. I watched for several minutes, waiting for it to change or fade, but it just stayed there, perfectly still. For a while, nothing else happened. The minutes dragged by. I made more coffee, but didn't drink it. I kept thinking I heard things, a scrape, a low hum, a muffled thump, but every time I looked outside or checked the cameras, there was nothing. Around 3 a.m., the monitors flickered, all at once. Static rolled across every screen. Not the usual momentary glitch, but a thick wave of distortion, black and white lines crawling up from the bottom, dragging the images out of shape. I leaned in, tapping the console. But the static only deepened. For a few moments, the whole wall of cameras was nothing but a smeared blur. Then, just as suddenly, the feed snapped back. But they weren't quite right. The lights outside seemed dimmer, off color, as if everything had been filmed on old, faded tape. More unsettling, some of the unit doors looked wrong. A handful were slightly ajar, just like the one I'd closed earlier, though I knew for a fact I'd checked and locked each one. The thin black line on camera 3 had grown, now branching toward the next unit, a crooked, creeping vein across the concrete. I tried blinking it away, hoping it was just some afterimage burned into my eyes, but when I looked again, it was still there, stretching closer to the edge of the frame. My fingers hovered over the intercom, debating whether to call my boss. But what was I supposed to say? I think a shadow is crawling around the storage lot? I almost laughed, except my throat had gone tight. I decided to check the doors again, at least the ones I saw open on the feed. I grabbed the ring of keys with a sweaty hand, steeling myself as I stepped outside. The parking lot felt different, quieter somehow, as if the world had rolled itself a little further away in those last minutes. The air was unnaturally still, not even the faintest wind, and the distant highway noise seemed smothered. As I moved down the row, my boots echoed louder than before. Each step seemed to pull the darkness a little closer. The units that had appeared open on the monitors were all shut tight when I reached them, latches in place, undisturbed. Still, I checked each one, tugging on the doors until my knuckles stung with cold. There was no sign of tampering, no footprints, nothing. And yet, when I looked back toward the office, I felt like something had shifted behind me. Like the rows of units had subtly rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking, angles sharpened just a degree too far. I hurried back inside, heart pounding, and locked the door. I took a shaky breath and tried to focus on the monitors again. This time, the black line on camera 3 wasn't there. For a moment I thought I'd imagined everything. I closed my eyes, counted to 10, then looked again. Camera 6 flickered. In the grainy, greenish image, I could just make out a shape, low and indistinct, half in shadow beside the same unit I'd checked earlier, 117. It barely moved, but I could see a slow, almost pulsing motion, like something breathing or waiting. I leaned closer, squinting, and that's when I realized what had been bothering me. The door to 117 was open again. Vita, this time, casting a long, sharp-edged shadow across the row. Without thinking, I reached for the phone. I dialed my boss's number, but it rang and rang. No answer, not even voicemail. The urge to leave, to just run out to my car and speed off, was almost overwhelming. But some stubborn impulse kept me rooted to the spot. Maybe I didn't want to leave the place unguarded. Or maybe I was afraid that whatever was out there would follow me home if I turned my back on it. The clock on the wall said 4:12. The minutes crawled. The silence became a kind of pressure, pushing in on my eardrums, making my thoughts go fuzzy. I started to notice little things. The way the breeze through the cracked window suddenly smelled sweet, almost rotten, like flowers left in a shut-up room. The gentle sway of the fluorescent light, which I'd never noticed before, as if something unseen was brushing against it. I rubbed my eyes, blaming exhaustion, but the sense of being watched only grew. The monitors flickered again, and this time, every feed showed something different, each row of units slightly wrong. On one, all the doors were open just a crack, perfectly aligned. On another, there were dark, wet stains spreading slowly across the floor, shapes moving in the reflections, but not in the real world. The worst was camera 9, which showed a view of the office itself. The image was delayed, a few seconds behind, but as I stared, I saw myself sitting at